power. It comes in many forms, but every kind of power gives us the same thing: the ability to make things happen. Electric power makes the lights come on. It's a basic need for modern life, and that gives electric companies another kind of power: economic power. They have huge monopolies, forcing people to do business with them. In California, that economic power's been abused, and the political power hasn't been able to fix it. Power helped get us into this mess, but it's an element we'll need to harness to force our way out.
Sadness, hopelessness sometimes, you start all over.
Robin Souza, the campfire survivor living in a trailer on her friend's side yard, says she gets nightmares. It's hard not to think about the fire, the escape from the flames, the people who didn't. She knows one person who died in the fire. She lost her home.
Me and a group of people, the Samaritan's Purse, went up there to sift through the ashes, and we did find a couple of things.
She loved that house. Robin and her husband, who didn't feel up to talking with us, worked hard on it.
I don't want anyone else to go through this.
We heard this from a lot of survivors, and a lot of them are suing PG&E. The company says it had a worn hook on this power line, the line the state says started the campfire, a finding PG&E does not dispute.
They seem to have admitted, at least to some degree, that there was faulty equipment there, and it doesn't sound like they took the proper procedures. Would anyone else in that situation, if it wasn't PG&E and they did something like that, would they be accountable?
We know a thing or two about what accountability looks like with PG&E. If it feels like we've seen this movie before, it's because PG&E's got a rap sheet. People don't trust it, and they can point to serious reasons why. Survivors like Robin want to know if there will be accountability. Yes, they want compensation from PG&E. Yes, there's a cottage profession of wildfire attorneys working to get it for them. But the victims also want to know if someone in a position of power out there is going to make PG&E change its ways. The answer is a fascinating story of its own. There's a convicted felon living here in San Francisco. This is a criminal who's never spent a night behind bars. That's despite the fact the state says they started wildfires that killed 107 people the last 2 fire seasons. This criminal isn't a person, it's the Pacific Gas and Electric Company, a multi-billion-dollar corporation with a monopoly over 4 out of 10 people living in California. On the map, PG&E looks like this. That's the turf of its monopoly, from Bakersfield almost all the way up to Oregon. They cover an area the same size as Oklahoma. It's got the population of 4 Oklahomas. 16 million people have no choice but to get their power from this company. If you granted it statehood, PG&E would be the 5th most populated state in the nation, just behind New York. So, what happens when a company that powerful commits a crime? The law tells us corporations are people, that they're to be treated just like you or me, but that's just not true. Cameras are banned from federal courtrooms when court's in session, but we can still show you how it really works in here. This is the story of 2 criminals. This is Carl, and this is PG&E. Both committed the exact same crimes. At this point, juries found both of them guilty. Now it's time for the judge to hand down their sentences. Carl's in a prison jumpsuit because he's facing up to 30 years in federal prison. PG&E came to court wearing a bunch of suits. Executives and a small army of lawyers are really all you see at the defendant's table when a corporation goes to court. When the jury in PG&E's case went to deliberate, the court told them, under the law, a corporation is considered a person, and all persons are equal. That sounds nice, but it's not true. In reality, PG&E has a superpower no human criminal does, an automatic get-out-of-jail-free card. If the charges are against the company, but not specific people in the company, the handcuffs and the prison bars simply disappear as options for punishment. To be clear, PG&E committed 6 federal felonies, which absolutely do qualify for prison time. If Carl committed those same crimes, legal experts say he'd probably get 5 to 10 years in federal prison. But it could be as much as 30 years if the judge found the case serious enough to throw the book at him. PG&E's crimes did come from something serious. 8 people died when a big PG&E gas pipeline split, blowing up an entire neighborhood in San Bruno. Prosecutors argued PG&E purposely used bad safety data to save itself money by doing less expensive safety work than it should have. The jury found PG&E guilty of 5 counts of willfully breaking federal safety laws and 1 count of obstruction for misleading federal investigators about it after the disaster. Remember, for all those crimes, PG&E could get no prison time. What they did get was the maximum fine of just $3 million and the maximum alternative to prison, up to 5 years probation. The judge did come up with some creative probation terms. He made PG&E spend another $3 million to run this ad on TV.
On September 9th, 2010, PG&E learned a tragic lesson we can never forget. This gas pipeline ruptured in San Bruno. We are deeply sorry.
And PG&E had to get a monitor. Not one of those. PG&E's monitor is a guy named Mark, former federal judge Mark Phillip. PG&E also got 10,000 hours of community service, which it's still working on, but we know PG&E did 82 hours of that service helping at a charity golf tournament. The charity told us none of PG&E's volunteers played golf. Still, the fact is PG&E got to serve some of its time on a golf course and none of it in a prison cell. But a corporate criminal's superpowers don't stop there. Let's suppose the judge decided to go easy on Carl, the human criminal, and give him probation too, a second chance to turn his life around. Probation is supposed to keep offenders on a leash. Stay on your best behavior, don't break the law, or you get dragged right back into court for more punishment. If Carl slips up during probation, he's going to prison, but not PG&E. It actually did violate its probation in this case, but the judge still doesn't have the option of prison. All he could do was add more terms to PG&E's probation, but PG&E still gets to walk out of court and into the free world, a world where it has a massive monopoly to sell the electricity we all need.
While an apology alone will never be enough, actions can make PG&E safer.
After San Bruno, PG&E's court-ordered apology ads on TV promised action.
We can never forget what happened in San Bruno. That's why we're working every day to make PG&E the safest energy company in the nation.
Words are not enough, PG&E wrote in a statement after the sentencing. We expect to be judged by our actions. So how did PG&E act after walking out of that court? 9 months after the judge sentenced the company to probation, the state says PG&E power equipment started 17 fires in Northern California. Those fires killed a combined 22 people.
The houses burned down. Friends, family. You just take what you can and leave, or you stand and fight.
As lawsuits poured in from the survivors of those fires and the loved ones of the dead, PG&E did take action. The company blocked all the lawsuits by declaring Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Bankruptcy automatically freezes all lawsuits against PG&E, forcing victims and survivors to come to the negotiating table to try to settle. What else did PG&E, this company that wants to be judged by its actions, do? They committed more crime, according to prosecutors. Can you point me to the crime in that photo?
The crime here is this right here, which is the branch that was over here, over these lines.
Mike Ramsey's been the prosecutor in Butte County for more than 3 decades. The year before the Camp Fire burned down Paradise, he says PG&E power lines started this, the Honey Fire, a small 150-acre fire that burned no homes down.
Hundreds of people are affected. No homes have been lost to the flames, thanks in part to neighbors who dragged out their own backyard garden hoses and went to work protecting their own property.
This branch in the wind came down, brought the power lines down to the ground and started the fire. That's a failure to maintain a distance around an energized power line.
And that's a misdemeanor.
That is a misdemeanor.
State law requires power companies to keep trees trimmed back a safe distance from power lines, generally 10 feet or so. But Ramsey says they're also supposed to trim back obvious problems, like branches hanging over the lines. How slam dunk do you feel like that case is based off of what you just pointed out on that picture?
We felt it was fairly slam dunk, and we felt it was very provable, and we let PG&E know that.
The crime Butte County alleged only carried a punishment of $1,000. But because PG&E is an offender on probation, a new criminal case might have cost them a lot more. As PG&E explained to its own investors after the trial, the probation includes a requirement that PG&E not commit any local, state, or federal crimes during the probation period. What PG&E didn't tell investors is that it also had to report new legal problems to its probation officer within 72 hours. But when Butte County started investigating PG&E for criminal charges for starting the Honey Fire, the company didn't go to its PO. Prosecutor Mike Ramsey says PG&E talked to him to try to get out of being charged.
They had asked to come up and talk with us about it and see if there was something that could be done absent a criminal conviction.
Over the course of months, we repeatedly asked PG&E to make its leaders available to answer our questions for this series on camera. They refused every time. Ramsey says a team of PG&E lawyers came to his office. They tried to convince him that he didn't have the evidence. That's when he says he brought it up.
You're a federal felon on probation, at which point the room got silent, and then we said, okay, now that we know what our bases are, why don't we start talking about something substantially more than $1,000.
Butte County ended up settling its criminal investigation of the Honey Fire for a civil agreement. Butte County agreed not to charge PG&E for the $1,000 crime in exchange for $1.5 million. Knowing what you know now about PG&E, do you have any second thoughts about how you settled this?
Actually, no. I mean, because what we want, we still want something that protects the people of Butte County.
Ramsey says a $1,000 conviction wouldn't do a lot for Butte County, but the $1.5 million is going to hire people to do safety inspections of PG&E's lines there for the next few years.
To purchase line inspectors, governmental line inspectors, just to help them out.
Butte County was getting ready to hire 4 new firefighters to do those inspections when it hit. Just 1 month after PG&E settled with Butte County, the Camp Fire burned a huge piece of the county down, killing dozens of people. It was the deadliest fire in California history. 85 people died. The state says this power line started it, owned by PG&E, the federal offender who just negotiated its way out of facing charges. So some people are going to take the dim view and go, well, you let them buy their way out of a crime.
Actually, no, because the federal judge, as somewhat expected, did find out about it.
When federal judge William Alsip found out, he branded PG&E a probation violator for failing to tell its probation officer about the settlement. As punishment, the judge ordered PG&E's new CEO, Bill Johnson, and its board of directors to take a field trip. Go to Paradise. See the destruction the Camp Fire caused for yourselves. This is a rare photo of that field trip. The corporate leaders of PG&E went to Paradise unannounced. That's Judge Alsip outside of his courtroom rolling along with them. Inside his court, Judge Alsip also expressed frustration at the company and the political system that regulates it. He was upset PG&E paid billions to shareholders that should have gone to trimming trees instead. So he banned PG&E from paying dividends to investors until it proves its improved safety. And we weren't allowed to film it, but I watched Judge Alsip in his courtroom blasting state regulators. How did so many fires occur under your regulation? That's what the people of California deserve to know. How did that happen? He asked. Judge Alsip also criticized the millions of dollars PG&E spends to influence our politics. Dollars that come in from PG&E's millions of customers on their power bills. But the judge didn't force PG&E to stop spending on politics. The company's critics say he should have.
PG&E is a convicted felon.
Mark Toney runs a nonprofit called TURN, the Utility Reform Network, which advocates for PG&E customers. He wishes the judge had banned PG&E from lobbying and making campaign contributions.
Why should a convicted felon corporation enjoy the same rights and privileges as a corporation that hasn't been convicted?
It's a compelling point. Human felons routinely lose their rights in California. They lose their Second Amendment right to own guns. Felons can't vote until they get out of prison. PG&E can't go to prison. And it's free to spend all the money it wants to influence the politics of our state. It lobbies at the Capitol. It lobbies its own regulators. And in the 2018 election cycle, after it was a convicted felon, state records show that PG&E donated more than $4 million to political campaigns here. It gave more than $500,000 to the state Republican Party, and it gave a little more to the Democratic Party, too. It also gave money directly to candidates for office.
Why should a company going into bankruptcy have enough money and be spending their money on buying elected officials?
Governor Gavin Newsom appoints the regulators who oversee PG&E. He's working with state lawmakers to craft new laws to help keep power companies from going out of business. State finance records show that the governor and 98 state lawmakers took campaign money from PG&E. That's 8 out of every 10 members of the state legislature. PG&E gave $208,000 to help elect Newsom to the governor's office. $208,000, money from a convicted felon under investigation for starting deadly fires. There's no law against that, but we wanted to know if the governor believed taking that money was the right thing to do. We invited him to sit down to discuss it at a time and place of his choosing. His office declined. So after he signed some bills for the state budget, we showed up to his Q&A session with reporters. Governor, why is it okay for you to take money from a felon?
And you know that the way you frame that is going to lead me to ask you to flesh
Your
that
office
out.
is aware of my question. I've tried to schedule time to talk
God
with you about
bless,
this.
I don't know what you're
PG&E
referring to.
was convicted of 6 federal felonies in 2016. After that, you took more than $200,000 to help get elected. How should people trust you to be running the show to come up with the solutions?
I wish you luck with whatever you're working on, but that's a strange question. So
Well, I know it's a strange question. It's a strange time, but there's a convicted federal felon making campaign donations in this state to our duly elected leaders, including the speaker, who took almost $9,000.
Okay. Yeah, look, we're trying to focus on the
It's
issue.
a serious question. You don't think people want an answer to that?
But it might make. We are focusing very, very collaboratively on addressing the issue of not only one IOU that went bankrupt, but the prospects of 2 IOUs going bankrupt. The prospect that 2 in Southern California will have a downgrade in their bond rating that
Well
could
aware
lead.
of the issue. Is it okay for you to take the money from them with the felony conviction? They're
there's-
still serving their sentence for crying out loud.
We have additional questions.
Yeah, this
Yeah,
is,
on education.
A policy question about the wildfire.
You're not going to answer. You're not going to answer the question.
I don't know what more I can say that will.
You can say whether you agree it was okay to take money from a felon and will you give it back.
We have additional
I mean, it's
questions.
just, I don't
I
accept
know you have
offense.
additional questions. All right.
Policy questions about the wildfire.
Governor, you seriously won't consider giving PG&E its money back? That's a serious question.
He's going to take a picture with these child care workers over
Okay,
here, so.
I'm not going to stop him from taking his picture. We also asked all 98 lawmakers who took money from PG&E if they'd give it back. We'll cover how much they did in money, our next episode. Governor Newsom has been talking tough on PG&E.
They do the right thing, then this is all going to be made a lot easier. If they don't, all options are on the table.
He joined the chorus of people calling for leadership change. PG&E started this year with a bunch of board members who'd been there since the company blew up part of San Bruno. PG&E changed its board. It hired a new CEO. Newsom said he was skeptical of some of the company's new leaders, but...
Got to give these folks a chance.
And what if they don't do better?
There's a word that drives shivers up people's spines. I'll give it to you. It's called municipalization.
Municipalization. Put simply, a government takeover of PG&E. To be clear, Governor Newsom isn't calling for a takeover. He's merely threatening one. He's waving this idea around like a big stick.
Is it feasible? I think it is. Does anybody want to really do that? I don't think so. That's the message I get back.
Michael Picker is president of the California Public Utilities Commission, the state regulator for power monopolies. Appointed by Governor Brown, Picker recently announced plans to retire. Under his tenure, the PUC floated this idea of a government takeover the month before Newsom was sworn in as governor. But Picker doubts it'll happen. First off, it would cost the taxpayers a fortune to buy out PG&E through eminent domain. And if we did, taxpayers would be on the hook for the damage next time this now notorious power grid sparks a fire.
Why would the state want to take on that risk? Why would any local government want to take on that risk?
And it's not like PG&E would just accept a takeover. The people of Sacramento voted to buy themselves out of PG&E territory back in 1923. PG&E fought it tooth and nail in court for 23 years. It wasn't till 1946 that PG&E exhausted its last appeal and the voters of Sacramento finally switched over to SMUD. But SMUD customers do pay less today than PG&E customers do. There are ideas besides a takeover, like splitting PG&E up into smaller regional companies.
Or we need to change the company and have another company run the electric system, another company run the gas system. We cannot keep business as usual.
Any change would require action, because waiting PG&E out isn't a strategy. When does PG&E's monopoly expire?
It does not generally. It's always been sort of a long-term proposition.
You heard him right. PG&E has a monopoly that never expires on its own. Regulators are frustrated. They've tried to punish PG&E into better behavior. Is PG&E a bad company?
They have not prioritized safety in the way that we have a right to expect. And the real question is, what do? We fined them $2.4 billion, the largest utility fine ever in the U.S.
That is a big fine, and it sounds impressive, but here's the thing. Part of the PUC's job is to keep utilities in good financial health. Let that sink in. This agency can punish utilities, but it never wants to punish them so much that it really hurts their business. And there's a reason for that. It protects your power service. But still, it's a catch-22. And there's a bigger issue here that most people don't get. It sounds all well and good to say that PG&E is regulated, but that might lead you to believe that the state keeps a close eye on what the company's doing on the ground to make sure it's safe. It doesn't. Consider this. PG&E has 100,000 miles of power lines above ground in California. How many miles is that? Picture the entire U.S. interstate highway system. Now double it. That's how many miles we're talking. Imagine how many people it takes to police those miles, and consider this. In all of Northern California, the PUC employs only 12 engineers to do inspections. That means each one would need to be in charge of 8,300 miles. But those 12 people don't only cover PG&E, they handle all the utilities, like phone lines too. The point is, no one from the state actively polices PG&E's work to make sure it's all being done safely. Our system is built on the idea that utilities will police themselves because it's in their own best interest. And yet, we keep getting burned. Governor Newsom is using that same mentality. When I asked him what might trigger a government takeover, he dodged with this.
It's in their interests at this stage to wake up to the new reality.
Governor Newsom did propose a new wildfire safety division inside the PUC. As of yet, it's unclear whether that means hiring more inspectors or exactly how many. So why are there so few inspectors to cover so much ground?
We are a rate-setting agency. We look at what is the need for infrastructure.
Safety was not a very high priority.
Steve Weissman used to be one of the PUC's judges handling disputes about power companies, including PG&E. He's now a professor at UC Berkeley Law. His impression from inside the PUC was that everyone figured we could just get by with only a rare spot check here or there. The lack of inspectors was one thing, but Weissman says there was also a mentality behind it. The government watchdog, he says, trusted PG&E.
The assumption was they don't need to be watched all that closely because they're going to do the right thing.
Trust in PG&E is in much shorter supply right now.
I would just like to feel secure that they're doing the best that they can.
Robin and thousands like her who lost their homes and their communities want somebody out there to make sure the power grid is safe, not just to trust that it's safe. In fairness to the PUC, safety was never a job it was designed to do. It's there to watch the money, more like the IRS and less like cops on the beat. Picker says that might have to change.
There's not a state safety agency. In that vacuum, we sort of have to do this. Who else will do it? Will the Attorney General do that? Will the federal courts do that? They tried.
The courts did try. But they're not done. When our society has a problem that the political machinery can't seem to solve, it's pretty common to see it end up here, in a courtroom like this one. Think about it. We can't fix all our problems with drugs or mental health, and when people don't get treatment, they very often end up getting arrested. In much the same way, our rogue utility ended up here, to stand trial for federal felonies. Yes, it's imperfect, it's not always fair, but it's what there is. We covered the fact that the court can't send PG&E to jail, but it's also true that this part of our government has done more to force PG&E to make changes than any other so far. And PG&E's court troubles aren't over. As prosecutors work the case of California's deadliest fire, PG&E might have to worry about something new, being charged with homicide. What are you contemplating right now as we look at possible criminal punishment for the Camp Fire?
To determine whether or not this is a criminal negligence, which makes it a felony, and also very well may make it a manslaughter, some 85 counts of manslaughter, as well as counts involving each of the nearly 14,000 homes, which is a part of reckless arson.
This is important. Back in the San Bruno gas explosion, 8 people died, but the criminal charges were not a version of homicide. Technically, no people were listed as victims. If the DA can make a criminal case against PG&E for the Camp Fire, the case could have tens of thousands of victims. Victims like 66-year-old Vicky Taft, who died in her living room. Her daughter Christina, who escaped without her mom, only has pictures now. Photos of old times with her mom and her mom's life as a young actress in Hollywood. Shortly after she learned that her mom died, Christina told us she wants answers. She also told us she wants action.
If there's some kind of change, I feel like that would help too, so it didn't keep happening. Something good so my mom didn't die in vain.
Robin Souza wants change too, from the people who run the power grid.
Can we do anything better? Let's try. So at least if we can reduce the chance of others being hurt and killed, that we do that.
Criminal law is a tool that can be used to punish companies when they don't prevent the preventable. A strong incentive to do better, if prosecutors can convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt.
We're not talking also just about the fines and the fees, the penalties, but we're also talking about restitution.
Another way to make PG&E pay for the damage.
It's not a case you can bring and lose.
Defense attorney Tom Johnson used to be a federal prosecutor in California. He says it's not as wild as you might think to charge a company with manslaughter. It's happened when people die in the workplace, for instance. But 85 counts?
Well, you're a defense attorney now. If you had a client charged with 85 counts of manslaughter, what would they be looking at?
Well, you'd be looking at a lot of time in prison. I mean, each count of manslaughter is potentially 3 years of prison.
255 years in prison is what a human might face if convicted on 85 counts of manslaughter. But Johnson says it's unlikely the Camp Fire will include charging a person in PG&E with a crime.
Can you put PG&E, the entity, in prison? No. Can you make things so difficult for them that they are forced to alter their business practices? You can do that. And I'm sure at the end of the day, that is what the district attorney and the attorney general want.
Courts can dish out more trouble for PG&E than they already have. In fact, federal judge Alsip, the one dealing with PG&E's probation, almost ordered the company to shut down its power grid on windy days until it can prove it's safe. He didn't do that, but he did add teeth to a law passed by the state legislature requiring power companies to submit fire prevention plans. The federal judge made that plan a legally binding term of PG&E's probation. He says he wants 0 fires started by PG&E. PG&E gave only limited access for our cameras to see a fire safety project in action, but sent us this video of what they say they're doing. The company recently reported that it inspected almost all, but not quite 100% of its equipment in the fire threat zones by the judge's deadline. If prosecutors can build a new criminal case against the company...
The worst case scenario for PG&E would be a trial. Once an entity is in trial, then you lose control of sort of the outcome and what the judge can do to you.
So there's 2 parts here: building the criminal case and then trying to settle it with a plea deal.
What is PG&E willing to admit? Are they willing to admit to a criminal violation? And then what specific terms of probations would they be willing to comply with?
Unsavory as it might sound, part of how the Camp Fire case goes could come down to negotiation. The Butte County DA is already working with the state attorney general's office, which has a bigger team of lawyers. And that's what it takes to go up against a company the size of PG&E.
You just can't start a fight you can't win with PG&E. It's a huge power player. And it doesn't matter how good a local deputy DA is. They will bury you with lawyers.
This is where the political money creeps back into our story. The state attorney general, Javier Becerra, didn't take campaign money directly from PG&E last election, but he did indirectly. PG&E gave more than $400,000 to a PAC called Building and Protecting a Strong California. That group, funded by PG&E, spent almost $200,000 on TV ads to help re-elect Becerra. Becerra's office did not respond to our written questions about how he plans to remain impartial after taking that money.
We know that this was an electrical caused fire from molten material that fell to the ground.
As for the Camp Fire itself, CAL FIRE says the sparks that started it came from this high-tension power line.
Transmission lines are very resilient to most conditions, and they're built to withstand extreme winds, and usually they're not a cause of large damaging fires.
It's not the kind of thing you would expect to happen.
It's not the kind of thing that we would expect to happen.
In a written statement, PG&E said it accepts that determination by CAL FIRE. The statement thanked the responders. PG&E wrote, "Our hearts go out to the victims." What didn't go out in that statement was an apology of any sort. Like the settlement they made a month before the Camp Fire, PG&E didn't admit it did anything wrong. To convict PG&E, prosecutors would need to prove wrongdoing, that somewhere along the line the company was criminally negligent.
You have to get inside PG&E's mindset, but they're not a person, they're a company.
Correct.
So how do you do that?
By showing activity, just like if you try to get inside someone's head and they're not talking. You say, okay, so what activity did they do? What were their actions or lack of action?
Investigators are digging through all the evidence they can get their hands on. Communications, financial records.
Right now, we're looking through terabytes of digital information. Every day is something, we discover something new and interesting.
PG&E will be arguing at some level that they were doing everything they can to make sure that fires didn't start. And that's where the case will be fought. Were they doing everything they could do and everything that was reasonably expected of a public utility like PG&E versus were they simply cutting corners and just hoping it didn't break out and cause a huge fire?
Our justice system and our state government will be working on this crisis for years. Many fire seasons will come and go. The people who escaped paradise don't want anyone else to go through what they did. Whoever runs the power grid in the future, they don't want it to spark preventable fires on windy days.
Try and correct whatever is wrong and not just say sorry and go about your business as you had before.
For now, who's running it is PG&E. PG&E promises it'll do better. We've heard that promise before. As long as it holds the monopoly, PG&E will have massive amounts of power.
We would like for them to be accountable, you know.
Some argue that PG&E's too big to succeed. It's definitely too big to fail. The lights would go out on 16 million of us. Ending the monopoly would be painful and expensive. Keeping the monopoly is a bet that we can rehabilitate a corporate criminal, living free in San Francisco, who's never spent a night behind bars.
I don't know what more I can say that will
You can say whether you agree it was okay to take money from a felon and will you give it back. In our final episode, we'll keep tracking the politicians who took money from PG&E. We'll also break down how and how much California's fire crisis will cost you.
There's not enough money in the state of California to continue to do this year after year.
What costs will you have to pay? And what costs belong to PG&E and the shareholders who own it?
The problem with it is they're not gambling with their money, they're gambling with our money. They're gambling with the public's lives and property.
And with all these bills to pay, what's it going to take to pay the most important one? Buying down the danger in our forests.
And I think we've known already for decades what we should be doing, and now we have to do it. I don't think we got a choice anymore, given where the climate's going, right, and given where fires are taking the forest.